Hi, everybody. We are going to get started right on time because I know we don't have that much time together today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for our Lunch and Learn series. Today, we are joined by the amazing Dr. Jonathan Fader, who is a licensed clinical and performance psychologist. And my name is Simone Figueroa. I am the president of Youth Thrive Educational Services. And before I turn it over to Dr. Fader, I wanted to share a little bit about our organization and about Dr. Fader as well. For those of you who we have not had the opportunity of partnering with, we provide proactive mental and emotional wellness solutions to colleges and universities to help students manage stress, become more resilient, and ultimately not just survive, but truly thrive throughout their undergraduate experiences and beyond. And so just a little bit about our esteemed guest, who we're so lucky is also one of our key contributors to our curriculum. Dr. Jonathan Fader is a licensed clinical and performance psychologist, best known for working with professional athletes in the MLB and the NFL, including the New York Mets and the New York Giants. Fader holds the belief that enjoyment and high performance do not have to be mutually exclusive in everyday life. Fader is the co-founder of Union Square Practice, a mental health center, and Sports Strata, a performance coaching group located in New York City. Dr. Fader regularly works with athletes, performers, entrepreneurs, businesses, schools, physicians, and with first responder groups such as the New York City Fire Department. He speaks to groups on topics of mindfulness, motivational enhancement, improving performance, stress reduction, communication, and team building. And Dr. Fader is a motivational interviewing trainer and is part of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. He has co-authored the book Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, Motivational Interviewing in Sports, with the founders of Motivational Interviewing, as well as his debut book, Life is a Sport. I am so excited to be joined by our amazing, dynamic individual, Dr. Fader. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Wow, I am pumped. That is some intro, and I'm going to do my very best to live up to all of it. I want to say before I begin that it's been a tremendous pleasure to work with You Thrive, to work with Simone and the whole team, because You Thrive is doing an amazing job at giving access to universities, to students, and to administrators and counselors and faculty these concepts of positive psychology, of self-compassion, of mindfulness. And I'm going to talk about those today. And I'm going to talk about them through the lens of my work with professional athletes and my work in sport. So this is going to be, as Simone said, 25 minutes of edutainment. It's going to be, my goal is to give us 20 minutes of enjoyment, and also to expose you. Some of you maybe have some familiarity with sports psychology and how it can apply to athletes, but also how it can apply to students, and also how it can apply to you in your role working with them. Just briefly, my work with the New York Mets is what kicked off this process. This is a little bit of a portrait that the New York Times did of me in the article they wrote about our work with the Mets. And while I was flattered about this, I think they got my hands a little wrong here. But what they did not get right is, what I've been doing for the past, say, 15 years is, yes, as a psychologist, I've certainly worked on helping people resolve problems. But I've had the tremendous honor of helping people who are doing pretty well get to great. So typically in psychology, we work on helping people who are struggling. And I do that to some extent. But my work with the Mets, my work moving on to the work with the Giants, was all about taking people who are already doing well, and how do you get to great? How do you find that extra edge? How do you find flow? And my interest is in not only doing that in sport, but in doing that in academics, and doing that in relationships, and doing that seeking high performance in business, in parenting. And so what we're going to talk about today is this concept I have, that mental conditioning, in other words, working on conditioning your mind and your mindset, not only your body, but how you think, how you respond to your own emotions, your own physiology, that work is accessible, that you can do it, and students that you work with can do it. Maybe you will get something from this talk, a tool that you will be able to use with students you work with, And maybe you'll get a tool that you can use for yourself. Because my essential belief really is that life is a sport. I believe that every day we have the chance to play. Every day we can work on two things. One, we can work on getting a little bit better in our life at the thing we do, at counseling athletes, at counseling students, at helping them overcome barriers, at helping them realize their talent. Maybe our sport is conversation, maybe our sport is presenting, but also we can work every day at finding more enjoyment and connection to the moment. And so I'm going to share with you some of the concepts, some of the tools that I work with athletes and that I believe you really can use in your day-to-day to level up, if you choose, in the performances that you do, whether that performance is presenting, whether that performance is connecting, whether that performance is working on sharing an idea. So, I just want to offer you the opportunity in our 20 minutes together to think of a goal you have in your life. Think of something you're trying to be better at. Could be in your role as a professional, or could be in your off the field role as a parent, as a friend, as a partner. Think of something you want to get better, communicating with your partner, getting better at at appearing more confident in a meeting, getting better at getting through to students that don't understand or are a little bit resistant to your message, getting better at being on time. Whatever it is that you're working on, this behavioral goal, think about it. And let's just take that through our talk today. So this is going to be really personal to you. Think of that behavior change you're trying to make. So when we think about these behavior changes, these performances, these things we're trying to get better at, with the people I coach and I talk about, I think of it in three components: what we want to do, why we want to do it, and how can we, what are the things that need to happen to get us success. Oftentimes we have a what goal. What? I want to get better at presenting. But really, the work of high performance is the nitty-gritty of the how. And for me, the big thing that gets in the way of these goals, the biggest barrier that we have is stress. Stress, to me, what we call anxiety, what we call stress, leads to avoidance, leads to us not pursuing our goals. I was working with a surgeon earlier, and he was talking about all these goals he had, but that he just looks at them and he feels like, I'm overwhelmed by all the steps. So what we're going to talk about is how, from performance psychology, we approach stress and fear, or what we commonly call stress and fear. I had the opportunity over my work with professional sports teams, my work in the NFL and MLB, to bring some of the most bravest, courageous people to speak about stress and fear. I would bring Navy SEALs to talk to baseball teams, and I would bring NFL teams, I would bring firefighters and rescue firefighters. And what's so interesting to me was I expected that, essentially the people, the athletes would say to the firefighters and the soldiers, I couldn't do what you do. I couldn't go into battle and face these really scary situations physically where I was in harm's way. But the surprising thing was that the firefighters and the soldiers were saying to these athletes, I couldn't do what you do. And I thought they meant like I couldn't run a route like that or hit a home run, things like that, right? Hit a free throw or a three-pointer. No, what they were saying was, I would be so scared to present in front of people. What we really fear as humans a lot of the time is the judgment of other people. And so I developed this technique where I would bring this bingo jar to talk to the athletes. And I would say, I have all of your numbers, your jersey numbers here. And I'm going to pull someone at random to be able to go and talk to the team. And one person would be picked at random. And I would say, this person who's picked at random would come up in front of the team, this athlete, and you'd have to freestyle rap with me in front of the team. And all these athletes would say like, oh my God, they were so scared they'd run for the doors. So I talked to Simone, and we decided we were going to pick someone here to actually freestyle rap with me on this Zoom. Some random person we're going to just pull from the audience. Here's the beat. So I bet you, we haven't noticed, I haven't seen the participants drop, but I bet you there are people here who got really scared. Am I going to be the person that's going to get picked? And that's because fear, anxiety, apprehension is really a biological thing that happens within us. When we want to accomplish a goal, when we're pushing ourselves, we feel what we would commonly call as fear, but really it's just, I call fear and anxiety two things: physical activation, my heart races, maybe I feel something in my gut, and future-oriented worry. What'll happen to me if I do that? So a lot of performance psychology is about helping people to get in the zone by helping them to realize that there's this green zone here in which we feel a little activation, but we don't feel too activated, where we're getting to the point where we would call it anxiety, overly activated. And we don't also feel too calm. We're in the right level of physiological activation and mental activation for the task. We call that flow. So I'm going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes walking you through, in performance psychology and sports psychology, what are the things we do? How do we think about things to be able to get into flow? We can't create a flow state where our ability matches the challenge. We can't just will it on ourselves. So if we're presenting or talking to a student or talking to our spouse, or we have a big game, but we can create the ideal situation to make flow more likely. And so what we're doing here is we're responding to this fight or flight response in an adaptive way. As humans, we fear this uncertainty. It's one of the things that we fear the most, is like, are we going to belong? Are we going to be judged? And so a lot of the technique in sports psychology help us to kind of be able to metabolize, to quiet, to work through those feelings, and to bring the best versions of ourselves. So for me, as I said before, anxiety really is just physiological arousal, what we feel in our body, this heart racing, this gut feeling of like nausea, dizziness, and it's also future-oriented worry. This feeling, this activation is actually there to prepare us to perform. As Steph Curry, the famous basketball athlete, says, I don't get bothered by butterflies anymore. They're just there to let me know it's time to perform. So what are these strategies that I've been talking about? I'm going to let you know some of the strategies that we've talked about. And I'm going to kind of skip ahead a couple slides to make sure we get to all of them. But I will say that what we work on in mental conditioning is helping athletes and performers to identify what they control. This was a sign that we put up in the New York Giants locker room. And it's one thing to think about. In the goal that you thought about before, what are the parts of that that you control? A lot of people who invest money think about their profit, but it's really making the best decisions that lead to the profit. And so in our work, what we're doing here is, for the goal that you had, thinking about what's the part of it that you control. I'm going to show you a funny video here about thinking about your ape. And before I explain what that is, check out this hilarious video, and we'll get back to the things you control and one thing you can share with the students you work with in terms of their performance, how to really focus on their ape. So here's the ape.
Ape and Phil just arrived in Los Angeles, and as soon as they check in their hotel room, there's going to be a gorilla in there, aka Chris Pontius, and the trainer here, Will, who's going to try to tame him, but is going to go horribly wrong. Basically, all hell's going to break loose. It's a good boy. Once he's a good boy, he's a good boy. Just don't make any type of movement. Don't make eye contact.
So a hilarious video that you'll never forget, perhaps. But what does it help us to remember? It helps us remember this acronym APE that we share with athletes and that you can share with students that you work with, or even use for yourself. Oftentimes we get worried about the future, about our goal, about are we achieving it? How can we achieve it? And so coming back to the concept I talked about before about what versus why and how goals, one way to make sure you have a how goal is to focus on the things you control in the thing you're working on. And so we call that the 8th. That it really helps to focus on your attitude, your preparation, and effort. And what this means is, do I have the best attitude with this particular situation? An example of that would be a growth mindset concept. When I feel stressed about school, am I able to convert it from a threat, like what could go wrong for me, to a challenge? This is an interesting opportunity to learn. If I'm in a talk and I'm like, I don't really understand how I can apply that, do I think, okay, let me get curious about this. I don't have to be a know-it-all. I'm going to be a learn-it-all. Those are attitudinal changes. Every day I work on gratitude as a way to shift my attitude, right? I can think about what's wrong, what I'm missing in my life, or I can focus on building the skill of being able to appreciate what I do have, both internally and externally. And that's rooted in so much positive psychology research. And then preparation. What do I do every day for my mental wealth, my mental health, and my mental wealth? What are the curls for my brain? What are the squats for my soul? And how much effort am I putting into that? And I'm going to give you a couple ideas of what you could work on. Because, what we really work on with athletes and high performers, and we coach people in academics and business, at Sports Strata, our performance group, we coach people in all different domains of life. And we help people to build mental performance routines, something that they do for their mental conditioning, the strength and the flexibility of their mindset every day, whether that's imagery, self-talk, mindfulness, building this into your day-to-day so that you're doing something in your routines. Here's an example of a routine that an athlete has. Although this is more of a superstition, check out these 2 different games that one of the most legendary hockey players, not just because it's a New York team, is doing. These are 2 separate games. And now this is more of a superstitious routine, right? Superstitions come about because of this psychological concept called compensatory control. We're scared, we're nervous, we have physiological arousal or future-oriented worry about a performance. And so we try to control it by a series of actions. What a performance routine does that's different is that we actually engage in behaviors that can help our mentality, not just a random behavior like a lucky rabbit's foot or doing a particular set of actions. So we work with high performers to develop routines before they perform. For example, with your students, something they're doing before a test, something that they're doing during a test if they get distracted or they have kind of worry or what we would call physiological arousal or future-oriented worry, what we might commonly call anxiety or fear, something that they do after to be able to reflect and calm down. So here are some things that people do. One is breathing. We know that there are a million different breathing exercises, but very simply put, athletes, performers, actors, people in business, students who learn the way into their nervous system through breath are able to create a better mind state to be able to, and a better physiological state to perform. Generally speaking, one rule of thumb is that a human in a rest state breathes about 6 breaths a minute. So even just getting people to breathe 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, and a 2-second hold, or box breathing, right? 4 seconds in, hold for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, hold empty for 4 seconds. These are techniques that you can look up online. Box breathing is a very common one, or just that 10-second breath. Using them yourself in a situation, because people often tell us to take a deep breath. That's not actually necessarily what you want to do. You really just want to slow your breathing rate down and breathe in a way that you would if your parasympathetic nervous system was kicked in, if you were more in rest and digest, not in fight or flight. Short story is working on breath is a tremendous way that people in the military, people in firefighting, people in business, people in surgeons, you as a person who's in athletic administration, as a parent, these are things that can help you calm down when it matters most. Another thing to do here is focus on your diaphragmatic breathing. So when you breathe in, your belly or your diaphragm moves out, and when you breathe out, your diaphragm or your belly decreases like a balloon. Well, the other thing we work on a lot with athletes is developing better self-messaging. And so the take home about this is we have so many thoughts during the day. You can't change your thoughts, but you can change how you respond to your thoughts. There's a Buddhist idea about this, there's 2 arrows in life. One arrow is what we get hit with, and the second arrow we shoot in ourselves. So things happen to us all day. We get a bad grade on a test, or a student does. We might get fired. We get criticized. We don't make the mark in terms of a particular goal. But the second arrow is what we shoot ourselves, the criticism that we have. So we work a lot on self-messaging, right? We can't control our thought, but we can control how we respond mentally to our thought. And so having certain self-statements that we have that help us move forward can really be really powerful. And so the most important thing to think about this is having instructional self-talk. An example of this in athletes, that athletes have, is just saying next play. So rather than spending their time thinking about what happened in the past, it's just a reminder to say, I got to focus on the next play, the next call, the next email, the next question. If I'm giving a talk to 200 people live and someone asks me a question I don't feel like I did too well with, I'm just saying next question to my mind. One self-talk statement that I always say to myself is this statement by Billie Jean King. It's a quote from Billie Jean King, the famous tennis player. Pressure is a privilege. To me, pressure is a privilege is a way to reframe, change my attitude about stress. This may feel stressful to give a presentation, but I say it's a privilege to be here. Even if I feel my heart rate go up, it's a privilege to be here and talk to the folks at You Thrive and talk to all of you. I'm sharing ideas I feel passionate about. And even if I do feel uncomfortable at times, perhaps, or my heart races, or I feel like I have a doubt, it's a privilege to be here. And so it reframes and reappraises and tells myself a different story about what I'm feeling, and that results in a different level of performance. We talked about growth mindset. That's another way to shift our self-talk, is to say to myself in moments where I feel stressed, this is an amazing opportunity for me. This is an amazing opportunity to better myself. It may be hard, but that friction, that challenge is something that's going to make me better. And the greatest athletes and the greatest performers aren't necessarily born with that, but develop that. And that's a big separator. It can be a separator for you, and it can be a separator for your student. So the last concept I want to share with you is how we think about mindfulness in athletics. It's not just me who's talking about mindfulness. It's some of the best in the field. Look at one of the best, or arguably probably some people would say the best basketball player of our time, LeBron James, in a playoff game here.
First, this is the last time out. He has played the entire game. He would have played the entire game in Game 6 if it wasn't a blowout.
I think, mindfulness has been shown to be really powerful in protecting us against stress and helping us to engage that really elusive flow state, meaning where we kind of slow things down and we're able to see the whole playing field. And by playing field, I mean the playing field of your life. I mean the conversation that you might have with a student, the conversation you might have with a colleague, when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel angry, when we feel nervous. Mindfulness every day is a seatbelt for life. And so there's so much to look into there. And it's one of the things that you can think about when you think about your goal. So coming full circle here, thinking about that goal you have, just take a second to write down, to think about, to text a friend, because we know the accountability of having someone else involved in our goals is really profound. But go ahead and write down one thing you heard today that you could use to improve your routine with regard to your goal. Could you change your self-talk? Could you incorporate more mindfulness? How could you interact with your own physiology in terms of breathing? What's one thing you're going to investigate more on the menu of options that I've shared with you today that you feel like could impact your personal goal that you shared or that you thought about earlier? So we'll take a look in my magic ball here, and we'll say, we're going to see I've developed this technology with You Thrive. So this ball can predict if you are going to complete your goal. Let's take a look. Uh-oh. You're not going to do it. I'll tell you, I'm going to fix that. I'll give you one last idea before we wrap up and go to questions, which is this rule that I have called the 3 cookie effect. It's a fancy name for the abstinence violation effect. It's Thanksgiving. You've sworn off cookies, and you go down after that you've stuffed yourself, and you go into the kitchen and you see these Oreos here, and you see that this row here has almost only one Oreo left. This one has a few spaces, so it's got almost a full row. This is a full row, and you say, I'll have only one Oreo. So of course, most people just take the single Oreo, but now you've broken your rule. You've broken your goal. Research shows us that once that happens, we tend to give up entirely. So one thing you can add to ensure that you will actually add that thing is to know that you might have a lapse, and that's okay. But if you have a goal change here, to think about who you can involve. So one other suggestion I would say here is text someone else your goal and ask them to keep tabs on you. Know what's going to take you off your goal in that behavior change ahead of time, and think about how you're going to plan ahead for it. If you deviate from your goal, what are you going to do to get back on track? My role for keeping on track of the gym is I know when I go on vacation or when I get sick, I'm off. So I usually make a gym date, or I have a appointment with a buddy to meet up after those times, after those vacations. So I know a lapse won't become a relapse and I'll give up on my goal. So beware the 3 cookie effect. So in sum, I'll just quote this famous, amazing coach. Sometimes we say it is what it is about our students. It is what it is about our colleagues. It is what it is about ourselves. But in the world of performance psychology, it also is what we make it. And my hope today is that you look at your life, even in this 20 minutes that we spent together, as a playing field. That you actually walk out of this training or this talk that we had, this brief talk, and you think of your life as a sport, as a playing field, that your next at bat, when you walk into that batter's box, when you walk on the field, and your next conversation with a student, and your next talk with yourself, that you think about the way you talk to yourself, that you think about the way you're paying attention to your own stresses, and you choose to look at it as a challenge, not a threat. You choose to look at it as an opportunity, as a privilege, and as a sport. I just thank you for being here. You can certainly reach out to me. As I said, we have a group called Sport Strata, where we do a lot of coaching with athletes, youth athletes, professional athletes, and coaching with professionals of all different disciplines. So feel free to reach out to me here, and I'll turn it over to Simone and to the group for questions, comments, thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fader. You really packed a lot in the short amount of time that we had today. And I definitely picked up on some tips and looking at things differently. And yeah, with the time remaining, we just wanted to open it up. If anybody has any comments, questions, thoughts that they wanted to share, feel free to use the chat. So Joanne said, super cool, really like the ape concept. It's one that she's never heard of.
Yeah, I find it really helpful because oftentimes we get stumped because we don't know what to work on. And also a lot of situations don't seem like they have something that you can work on, right? So it's like sometimes people, it really works when you have a negative outcome, right? If your team has a loss, if your student failed the test, oftentimes we don't realize that, wait a second, I can always work on how I think about this. I can always work on how I'm going to prepare for next time. And I can always work on adding 1% more effort to the way I prepare.
Someone commented or put a question. This reminds me of WHOOP, Wish Outcome Obstacle Plan. Yes, by Dr. Gabrielle Oettingen, but has the routine element recognizing that stress threat must be handled.
Yeah, I think, I love the WHOOP idea. And I think, what performance psychology focuses on that I think is additive and brings more to that WHOOP idea is paying attention to what's happening internally for the performer, right? So for example, if you say to an athlete, hey, calm down, they don't actually know how to do that, right? I think the worst thing you could say to someone when they're stressed is to calm down. So this gives a roadmap for people. So if you have an obstacle, there's an external obstacle in your life, but there's also internal obstacles. There's your own self-doubt. There's your own feelings of physical activation, your heart racing. And so having things you can do internally as well as externally can be super critical to making sure you bring your best self to these performances. There was a question about trainings available. Yeah, you can. We do all kinds of trainings, and you can reach out to me on our website, or just reach out. My email's on that slide. And if you have any questions, happy to shoot out. We don't have anything on the calendar, but we certainly will probably in the next year.
Ryan asked, how can we ensure that our preparation doesn't end up being a hamster wheel where we feel that we can or should always spend more time preparing? It's a great question.
It's a it's a really great question. I think the first thing about it is what I work on with athletes is to have fun about this. There's a quote by Urban Meyer, the football coach I always come back to, is when you're furious, get curious. And I think that the attitude that I like to have towards building routines is that this is a creative act. Because if it becomes something that adds stress, then it becomes kind of overwhelming in some way. And I encourage people to work on one thing at a time. So work on one, like if you're thinking about routines, it's something, a pre-performance routine, a resetting routine is what you do in the moment, and then a follow-up routine. Just like work on one technique at a time. This is also where I think it's really helpful to have a coach, even if it's someone that you see once or twice, because it's really hard to do these things on your own. And there's so many different resources for coaching around things like that. And unlike other things where, like for example, therapy, where you go on kind of forever, this can be done in 2 or 3 meetings sometimes with people. Just helping someone to look. It's hard to see yourself and have full self-awareness. So I find having a coach in all this really helps to have perspective on it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fader. I know that we're short on time. And I also love when the group helps each other out and sharing resources. Elizabeth, thank you for that resource to provide. I think it's Johan with about yes, Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. I think that's how you pronounce his name, to learn
That was
more.
impressive, Csikszentmihalyi. There's a whole video actually on YouTube where you can learn how to pronounce his name. But that was Simone. I'm definitely impressed. You must have done some performance imagery.
I was sweating a little bit pronouncing it, but
No.
thank you so much everybody for coming. We do host these lunch and learns for the most part monthly. And if you are interested in learning more about how you can bring mindfulness, positive psychology, and self-compassion to your students, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I'd love to talk with you and figure out how our solutions might be able to be a benefit to the great work you're already doing. And Dr. Fader, thank you so much. If you have any questions, I appreciate your willingness to field them from our participants, and we look forward to seeing you all at future events. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Simone.